Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Jackson, thank you for being here. I hope you got some rest last night, and congratulations.
Very little, Senator, but that's all right.
Me too. But thank you for being here, and congratulations to your family and your husband, who has an impressive medical list of accomplishments that he should be proud of. I'm sure that you are too. And thank you to your family, the public servants, serving in the military, serving in law enforcement, educating our children. You're a role model family. I do want to go back. This morning, I ended up turning to a channel that I never watch, just to see what was being said about the proceedings. I thought it was interesting that they were ridiculing some of my colleagues on this side of the aisle for bringing up the behavior of past Supreme Court hearings. This is really the appropriate venue to do it. I guess we could talk about it when we're reviewing intellectual property or something else, but contextually, this is the time to do that. And I think we all have to agree that the behavior in the Kavanaugh hearing was inappropriate. I hope we never get back to it. And I hope we can all agree that many of the behavior or the positions that some of my colleagues took on the other side of the aisle with Justice Barrett was abhorrent, and we should never do it again. That's why I'm so glad that for the most part, we behaved in an appropriate manner here. I'm going to get to some questions, if time allows, that relate to some other questions that my colleagues have asked. But Judge Barrett, did I understand correctly that at a young age you won a debate competition, or was it oratory competition?
I was in speech and debate. It was one team, and I did original oratory as my primary event. And
did you continue your debate competition? Did you continue to do that? First question. Did you continue to do debate competition?
Continue into
college? Yeah, I mean, were you doing that in school and college?
I did not do it in college. No, I did it from middle school through high school. Okay. And stopped when I graduated high school.
I did too, and I recall with that we would get assigned a topic that wouldn't necessarily be one that we agreed with, but we had to argue it. Were you ever in a situation, or did you get to pick a topic and only argue the side that
So I didn't do what it sounds like you're referencing is extemporaneous speaking.
Yeah.
I think I did that once in one competition. I did original oratory, which is where I wrote my own speech.
Okay, you've had an opportunity to debate a lot as a defense counsel, I would assume, in the court of law when you're debating a position. And the reason I asked that question is that yesterday when Senator Kennedy was asking you about the expanding the court, or what we call court packing, you said, I haven't really thought about it, but I hear the arguments on both sides. And I hear the argument on both sides. So could you briefly describe to me your perception of the arguments on both sides?
My understanding of the argument is about whether or not to expand the court beyond the 9 justices that are on the court right now, the 9 seats that are there. And
if you were to view, I mean, right now it's 9 is fine, 4 or more. I mean, that's really the two arguments. So do you understand, or have you heard any of the arguments for or against either side?
I'm not even sure about the 4. I've just heard people talking about putting more justices on the court, expressing concerns that the court has become politicized, that the court has become unbalanced in terms of what people perceive to be views of the majority of the justices. And so I've heard arguments about rebalancing the court on that side. And then there's the argument that many on the dais have stated about the inappropriateness of doing so, the concern that it might lead to some kind of a war of every time there's a new president adding justices to the court.
Actually, yesterday when Senator Whitehouse, I think it was Senator Booker, who observed Senator Whitehouse's presentation made a comment about how Rhode Island, New Jersey being a bit bigger, would have a bigger graphic to display. I went back, I think that New Jersey is 6 times the size of Rhode Island by square miles. North Carolina is 36 times the size of Rhode Island. And before my friends from Texas chime in, I would let them know that if Alaska were 2 states, they'd be the 3rd largest state. So I'm decided to use the White House format for dark money so that we have a balanced understanding of the fact that our proceedings here, the aspirations for the court, there is an ecosystem out there on both sides. As a matter of fact, we had a judicial nominee who actually participated in this ecosystem. I think you could reasonably assume if they participated in that ecosystem that they probably would have been an activist judge. The point that I make here is that we've seen this ecosystem mobilized to support you, and I think, Judge Jackson, you said you haven't had any encounter with Demand Justice. I don't know if you've had any encounter with some of these that are abbreviated, or I'm sorry, either acronyms or abbreviated, so I wouldn't expect you to. It would be interesting if we could, for the record, determine if you have had any interactions, but with respect—
I have not, Senator. I've never seen most of those.
That's good enough for me. I wouldn't expect you to be honest, sitting on the bench, but they are out there, and they have a specific plan. And their specific plan, as a matter of fact, I was inspired by Senator Whitehouse's seat, so I went out to Demand Justice. They have a specific plan. Step 1, 4 seats on the Supreme Court. We must add 4 seats on the Supreme Court to restore balance, which by their opinion is a majority with their view and their judicial philosophy. They're thrilled that President Biden has promised to appoint a commission. In fact, they're so thrilled that they want to make sure that they can influence the outside of the commission by endorsing their 4-seat strategy. They want to recruit 25,000 volunteers. This is on their website, their strategy, to influence the commission's recommendation. And then they want to nuke the filibuster. 51 votes to make a decision that could ultimately be to pack the courts. This is their stated goal. They're proud of it. Senator Whitehouse was talking about how the prior president was influenced by an organization. I would say that Senator Jackson and almost everybody that the president vetted before, Judge Jackson, are on this list. So I think it's intellectually dishonest to say that the administration, that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, are not influenced by this organization. We've tracked some of the fundraising and support in re-elections. They're engaged, and they're influenced by it. But let me tell you what I'm really worried about with the court packing risk that we have today. We're talking about the ultimate destruction of 2 institutions. Back in January, Senator Schumer laid a vote down on the floor that ultimately would have reduced the majority of 60, the filibuster limit of 60, to 51. He was doing it as a way to pass a single bill, but we all know what happened when Senator Reid nuked the executive calendar for circuit court judges. It led to you only being subject to 51 votes to be confirmed. That nuked the executive calendar. In January, Senator Schumer was laying the groundwork for the same thing. Now, I worry that's the destruction of the Senate institution as far as I'm concerned. I think we have to be a consensus-based organization. We don't need to be a 100-member House of Representatives. And that vote happened. What disappointed me most about that vote is back when President Trump was calling on us and pressuring us to nuke the filibuster when we had control of Congress. I signed on to a letter with more than 60 members to say that I would never do that in the face of a Republican president whose policies I supported. I did that to send a very clear message. I respect this institution, and I respect the court, which almost certainly would have been, we would have had pressure from our side of the aisle to pack the court a little bit more. Now, every member who was here back when we signed that letter, who's on this committee, changed their position and voted to potentially nuke the filibuster just 2 months ago. So I hope you can understand my concern about the political winds and the potential damage that it could do to the Senate and do to the Supreme Court. I think it was Federalist Paper 78, where Hamilton talked about the vulnerability, or I think the feebleness. Now, he was arguing, I think, the case for lifetime appointments. But I do think that the Supreme Court is a fragile institution. And I do believe that if we think it's politicized now, think about how it would be if we destroy the institution of the Senate so that a strict party line, partisan vote, we expand the court. That's why court packing is important, and that's why we ask a question that I know you're not going to answer, but I know that Justice Breyer and Justice Ginsburg did. And if there's any Supreme Court justice listening right now, I wish that they would speak up, because I think your institution is in peril, and accelerating it to a truly political body is only one successful nuking of the filibuster vote away in the U.S. Senate. This is serious stuff. I was at Price Waterhouse. I was a partner at Price Waterhouse back during the Arthur Andersen Enron scandal. I saw about a 100-year-old top-tier Big Five consulting firm cease to exist because their reputation suffered. If we pack the court, the only thing that you all have, that the Supreme Court has, is its integrity and the esteem that the American people and the trust that they put into it. Packing the court could cause the Supreme Court to lose the trust of the American people. And I think if we want to expand the court, let's do it for the only valid reasons. Maybe the justices come to us and the Chief Justice come to us and say, the workload is too great. The times have changed. And then convince 60 members of this body to consider it. But when you've got a partisan organization here that's putting a pipeline of people in there that they think like them and have a judicial philosophy like them, how can any reasonable person think that this is just kind of fixing the mechanics? It's a partisan decision that even some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have taken the bait. So much so that they would reverse a commitment that they made with me when they signed that letter to say they would never nuke the filibuster and then nuke it. President Biden's on that list too. Back in 1983, he gave a rousing speech in a Judiciary Committee hearing saying, don't pack the court. He gave a rousing speech on the Senate floor saying, don't nuke the filibuster. But now we're in this posture to where we could destroy two institutions if we're not careful. So I actually hope that you can at some point study the issue thoroughly and understand the risk to this institution that you're likely to be confirmed to. It's serious. And you could end up being there. You'll have a lifetime appointment. You could actually be there and witness its demise real time if we allow the court to be packed. Now,